I thought winning the lottery was the biggest shock of my life, until I invited my family over to celebrate. My son showed up with a smooth financial expert, and everything felt off. Then my nephew pulled me aside and whispered, "I overheard them upstairs. They're planning to drug you tonight." I stayed calm, pretended to drink, and let them think I was fooled. But what happened next changed everything. Before I take you through how one ticket uncovered a betrayal I never saw coming, do me a small favor. Stay with me. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who may need them more than they realize. The ticket was worth more than I'd earned in my entire life. After taxes, the number would still change everything. I'd spent over 4 decades teaching mathematics to restless teenagers in a small town outside Riverton, Ohio. Long nights grading papers. Summers tutoring to make ends meet. A quiet, ordinary life built on routine and responsibility. My wife, Elaine, used a joke that if luck ever showed up for me, it would arrive late and stay briefly. She passed away 5 years earlier after a long fight with cancer. She never got to see that machine flash green. I cried in the parking lot, not from joy, from the weight of it. The lottery office confirmed everything within days. The money would be transferred quietly, securely. I told no one at first. Not neighbors, not former colleagues. I needed time to think, to breathe, to decide who I could trust when trust suddenly mattered more than ever. The first person I called was my son, Aaron. He was 34, working in commercial property development in the city. Smart, ambitious, confident in ways I never had been. We'd grown distant after Lane died. No arguments, no falling out, just space filled with missed calls and postponed dinners. "Dad?" he answered, distracted. "Everything okay?" "I need you to come by this weekend," I said. "I have something important to tell you." There was a pause. "I'm busy, but yeah, sure. What's going on?" "Just come," I said. "Bring anyone you like." I also called my nephew, Lucas, my brother's son. After my brother died years earlier, I helped Lucas through community college. He worked long hours as a line cook, saving for culinary school. He had his father's honesty and his mother's work ethic. A good kid. Saturday came faster than expected. I cooked Elaine's pot roast, the one that always filled the house with warmth. I set the table with her good dishes. Jazz played softly in the background. For the first time in years, the house felt alive. Aaron arrived first, and he didn't come alone. "Dad, this is Malcolm Reeves," he said, stepping aside. "He's a financial consultant I work with." Something tightened in my chest. I hadn't said anything about money. Malcolm smiled smoothly, extended a hand. His suit looked expensive, his confidence rehearsed. Everything about him felt early, too early. Lucas arrived shortly after, still in work clothes, smiling wide, hugging me the way he always had. His presence grounded me. Dinner was tense. Aaron spoke more than usual. Malcolm spoke carefully, choosing words like tools. Lucas mostly listened. Finally, I set down my fork. "I won the lottery," I said. 50 million. Silence crashed into the room. Aaron's face shifted too fast. Shock, then calculation. Lucas just stared, stunned. "That's incredible," Aaron said loudly. Too loudly. Malcolm leaned forward immediately, already moving. This kind of situation requires immediate planning. Winners who don't act fast lose everything. Something was wrong. Later, Aaron stepped out to take a call. Malcolm went upstairs. Lucas caught my eye. "Use the upstairs bathroom," he said softly. "Follow me in 2 minutes." My heart started pounding. When I reached the hallway, Lucas pulled me close and pointed to a half-open door. Inside, I heard my son's voice, low, sharp, unfamiliar. "He's old. He'll sign whatever we put in front of him." Malcolm answered calmly. "Once we have authority. The transfers are legal, and if he gets confused, we'll help that along." My vision blurred. My own son was planning to drug me, to steal from me, to erase me quietly. Lucas grabbed my arm, steady and furious. "We don't confront them yet," he whispered. "We get proof." Downstairs, Aaron offered me a drink. I accepted, and the trap began to close. I held the glass in my hand and felt the weight of it as if it were heavier than liquid and ice. My son sat across from me, his leg bouncing slightly, his eyes never quite meeting mine. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, relaxed, confident, like a man who believed the ending had already been written. Lucas caught my eye for half a second. That was all it took. I lifted the glass toward my mouth, then stopped. "You know," I said casually, "your mother used to say something about trust." Aaron stiffened. "Dad, maybe this isn't the time." She said trust is like glass. I continued, keeping my voice steady. Once it cracks, you can still see through it, but it's never the same. Malcolm shifted in his seat. I set the glass down untouched. "Before I drink this," I said, "I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me something." Aaron forced a smile. "Sure. What? Is there anything in this drink besides whiskey?" The air in the room froze. Aaron's face drained of color. Malcolm stood abruptly. "Mr. Dawson," Malcolm said quickly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Sit down," I said. My voice surprised even me. It wasn't loud, but it carried something I hadn't felt in years. Authority. Lucas stood up slowly, positioning himself between Malcolm and the doorway. "Dad," Aaron said, his voice cracking, "you're being paranoid." "I heard you upstairs," I said, planning paperwork, planning offshore accounts, planning how confused I'd be after tonight. Silence. Then Aaron dropped to his knees. "I'm in trouble," he said. "Real trouble. I owe people money." "How much?" I asked. $280,000. "Gambling?" He nodded, tears spilling. "I thought I could fix it. One more bet. Then you called. I knew you'd come into money. I knew this was my way out." I looked at him. The boy I'd raised alone after Elaine got sick, the child I taught to ride a bike, the teenager whose college tuition I worked double shifts to afford. Lucas shook his head slowly. "You were going to drug him." Aaron collapsed forward. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Malcolm backed toward the door. "This is going sideways," he muttered. "Don't," Lucas warned. The police arrived within minutes. The drink tested positive for a crush sedative strong enough to leave some of my age disoriented for hours. Malcolm wasn't a licensed advisor at all. He had warrants in 3 states. My son had found him through an online forum for desperate gamblers. They arrested both of them. Aaron didn't look back as they led him away. After the house emptied, I sat alone in Elaine's chair and cried. Not just for what had happened, but for what had been lost long before the lottery ticket ever printed. The legal process took months. Aaron pleaded guilty. Malcolm faced federal charges. The judge didn't soften her tone. "You targeted the one person who should have been safest from you," she said. "This court will not overlook that." 3 years. I watched my son disappear through a side door and felt something close inside me. The money sat untouched. Every time I thought about it, I thought about the way greed had stripped my son bare. Lucas checked on me daily. Never once mentioned money. 6 weeks later, I finally spoke. "I want to do something with it," I said. He listened. I paid for his culinary school, set up scholarships in Elaine's name, funded addiction programs, cancer research. I also created a trust for Aaron, locked tight, accessible only if he completed treatment, held steady work, and proved change. I visited him 6 months later. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "Good," I replied, "because forgiveness isn't the point." "What is?" "Becoming someone who wouldn't do this again." He cried. I left lighter than I'd arrived. Years passed. Lucas graduated with honors, opened a restaurant, named it after Elaine. Aaron got out, stayed sober, paid back debts, worked helping others avoid the traps he fell into. One evening, watching my grandson play on the floor, I understood something I hadn't before. Money hadn't ruined my family. It had revealed it. And because I listened instead of drinking that night, because I stayed calm instead of panicking, everything that mattered survived. The house felt hollow after the police left, like sound itself had learned to echo differently. Every familiar object carried a new weight. The coffee mug Elaine favored, the framed photo from our last anniversary before the cancer took over, the spot on the carpet where Aaron had knelt, begging. I kept replaying that moment, not his tears, but the certainty in his eyes before everything unraveled. The certainty that he could do this to me and live with it. Sleep didn't come that night, or the next. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the numbers on a piece of paper the lottery office had given me. I tried to see them as opportunity, as freedom. All I saw was a mirror, reflecting what money pulled to the surface. Lucas came by early the next morning with groceries and quiet concern. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just started making eggs, the way Elaine used to when she knew I was too overwhelmed to speak. "They'll call again today," he said gently. "Lawyers, reporters." "I'm not answering," I replied. "That's probably wise." We ate in silence. It was comfortable, which told me everything I needed to know about the difference between him and my son. The next weeks passed in slow motion. Statements, paperwork, meetings with prosecutors. Every detail confirmed what I already knew. Malcolm had been grooming Aaron's desperation for months, feeding him just enough hope to turn him into a weapon against his own father. I was asked more than once if I wanted to press additional charges. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. If I protected him from consequences now, I'd be complicit in whatever he became next. The sentencing hearing arrived gray and cold. I sat in the back, hands folded, listening as my son's lawyer described him as a man who made a terrible mistake under pressure. The judge listened politely, then leaned forward. "You planned to incapacitate your father," she said. "You sought to exploit his trust. That is not a mistake. That is a decision. 3 years. I felt nothing when the gavel came down. Not relief. Not sorrow. Just finality. Outside the courtroom, a reporter approached me. "Do you regret calling the police on your own son?" I looked at her for a long moment. I regret that he gave me no other choice. That was the only statement I ever made. The money remained untouched longer than anyone expected. Friends hinted. Distant relatives called. Old colleagues suddenly remembered my number. I ignored them all. One evening, as Lucas and I sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the trees, I finally said what had been building in my chest for weeks. "I don't want this money to rot," I said. "I don't want it to turn into a reminder of what almost happened." Lucas nodded. "Then make it mean something." So I did. I paid for his schooling first. No hesitation. No conditions. He tried to refuse. I didn't let him. "You saved my life," I said. "Let me help you build yours." I created a scholarship fund in Elaine's name for first-generation students pursuing education or mathematics. I donated to cancer research, not because it would change the past, but because it might soften someone else's future. I supported addiction recovery programs quietly, anonymously. And then there was Aaron. The trust one set up for him was strict. Locked down. No early access. No loopholes. Therapy. Recovery. Work. Time. When I visited him 6 months later, he looked smaller. Quieter. The bravado stripped away by concrete walls and consequence. "I don't expect anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted to see you." "I know," I replied, "and that's a start." We talked for an hour. About addiction. About shame. About the moment he realized how far he'd gone. "I hear Mom's voice every night," he said, staring at the table, "asking me what I'm doing." I nodded, listened to it. When I left, I didn't feel healed, but I felt steadier. Years moved forward. Lucas graduated, took risks, opened a restaurant. He named it after Elaine without asking me first. When I saw the sign, I had to sit down. The opening night was warm and loud and full of life. Aaron attended sober, nervous, respectful. He stood back, watching, not try to reclaim anything he hadn't earned. That mattered. Later, as I sat alone in my living room, listening to the quiet tick of the old clock Elaine loved, something finally settled inside me. The lottery ticket hadn't saved me. Listening had. If I hadn't paused, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't stayed calm instead of celebrating too loudly, everything would have been gone. My money, my dignity, possibly my life. Instead, I was still here, changed, scarred, but standing. And the story wasn't over yet. Time did not rush to comfort me. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if testing whether I could live with what I now knew. The house settled into a quieter rhythm. Mornings were still. Afternoons stretched. Evenings came with a heaviness that pressed against my chest just before sleep. When the mind has nothing left to distract it, I kept teaching for the remainder of the semester. Not because I needed the salary anymore, but because routine anchored me. Teenagers still complained about homework, still rolled their eyes at equations they swore they'd never use. Standing at the board, chalk in hand, I felt normal again, like the world hadn't split open behind my back. No one at school knew. I hadn't told them. Wealth invites attention, and attention invites questions I wasn't ready to answer. Lucas became a constant presence. He never hovered, never pried. He fixed things around the house without being asked. Changed light bulbs. Took out trash. Sat with me during long evenings when silence felt too loud. He reminded me of my brother more every day. Steady, grounded, unassuming. One night, while we washed dishes together, he asked carefully, "Do you ever think if the ticket hadn't happened?" I knew what he meant. "Yes," I said. But then I remembered that if it hadn't, I'd still believe a lie. He nodded. "Truth hurts." "But lies rot," I replied. The trial for Malcolm dragged on longer than Aaron's case. He fought harder, denied everything, claimed he'd been misunderstood, framed by a family dispute. The prosecution dismantled him piece by piece. Witnesses came forward. Victims. Other lottery winners who hadn't been as lucky as I was to overhear a plan before it became action. When the verdict finally came, guilty on all major counts, I felt nothing but relief that he wouldn't be able to do this to anyone else for a long time. Aaron wrote me letters from prison. At first, they were frantic, apologetic, filled with explanations and self-loathing. I didn't respond right away. I needed to see consistency, not desperation. Over time, the tone changed. He stopped defending himself, stopped blaming circumstance. He wrote about meetings, about sitting in circles with men who'd lost everything to addiction, about realizing how often he convinced himself he was smarter than consequences. "I don't recognize the person I was," he wrote once, "and that scares me more than prison does." That letter stayed with me. I visited him again a year into his sentence. He looked healthier, clearer. When he spoke, he didn't rush. When he apologized, it wasn't for effect. "I'm not asking you to fix this," he said. "I know you can't. I just want you to know I'm trying." "I see that," I said. "Keep going." When I left, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Cautious. Fragile. But real. Meanwhile, Lucas thrived. Culinary school consumed him. He worked harder than I'd ever seen anyone work. Late nights, burned hands, exhausted smiles. He called me when he passed exams. Sent photos of dishes he was proud of when he graduated. I sat in the audience and cried openly, not bothering to hide it. Elaine would have loved that moment. The restaurant took longer. Permits. Investors. Planning. Lucas asked me once if I wanted my name on anything. "No," I said. "Let it stand on its own." He nodded. "I already know what I want to call it." When the sign went up, Elaine's, I had to pull the car over. Seeing her name in bold letters, alive in the world again, did something to me I hadn't expected. It didn't reopen the wound. It honored it. The opening night was crowded and warm. Laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk. Aaron attended quietly, sober, standing near the back. He didn't push forward. Didn't try to reclaim familiarity. That restraint mattered more to me than any apology. Later that night, Lucas and I sat alone at the bar, glasses untouched. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Calling the police?" I thought carefully. "No," I said. "I regret that it was necessary, but not that I did it." He raised his glass. "To doing the right thing when it cost the most." We clinked glasses. Years passed. Aaron was released on parole. He came to see me the first week, hands shaking slightly, eyes steady. "I'm not here for money," he said. "I just want to rebuild." "Then start with honesty." I replied. He did. He worked at a nonprofit teaching financial literacy. Lived modestly. Attended meetings without fail. When the trust finally unlocked years later, he didn't touch most of it, paid his debts, donated a portion to addiction recovery, set the rest aside for a future he intended to earn, not buy. One Sunday afternoon, watching him help Lucas clear tables at the restaurant, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. Pride. Not blind, not naive, but grounded in evidence. The lottery money dwindled, not from waste, but from purpose. Scholarships funded, research supported, lives nudged in better directions. I never missed it. Not once. People sometimes asked if winning had ruined my family. No, I would say, it revealed us. And revelation, painful as it is often the first step toward repair. I was older now, quieter, less interested in appearances, more interested in meaning. The lottery hadn't given me happiness. It had given me truth. And truth, once faced, gave me something better. Peace earned, not imagined. As the years unfolded, life settled into something steadier than I ever expected. Not easier, just steadier. The sharp edges dulled. The constant tension I'd lived with since the night of the arrest slowly loosened its grip. I stopped waking up braced for disaster. I stopped listening for footsteps in my own home. Teaching became optional, then unnecessary. I retired quietly at the end of the school year. No announcement. No party. I cleared out my classroom one afternoon when no one was around, packing old textbooks, chalk-dusted notes, and the mug Elaine had given me years ago. Walking out for the last time felt less like an ending and more like a release. Without work anchoring my days, I had to learn how to live again. I took long walks in the mornings, read books I'd always meant to read, sat on the porch with coffee, and watched the neighborhood wake up. For the first time in decades, my time belonged to me. Lucas's restaurant became a second home. I watched him grow into leadership the way good chefs do. Quietly, through consistency. He knew every staff member's name, their stories, their strengths. He corrected without humiliating, praised without exaggeration. People wanted to work for him, not just because the food was good, but because the kitchen felt fair. Elaine would have noticed that immediately. Aaron kept his distance at first, even after his release. He didn't assume closeness, didn't test boundaries. When he called, he asked how I was before saying anything else. When he visited, he didn't stay long. It was his way of showing respect, of letting trust rebuild at its own pace. One afternoon, while we sat across from each other in my living room, he said something that surprised me. "I don't want to be forgiven," he said quietly. "I want to be different." "That's harder," I replied. "I know." He meant it. He told me about the people he met through his work. Families drowning in debt. Young men already convinced money was the only measure worth. He shared his story openly, without softening it. "I tell them I almost destroyed my father," he said. Not to shock them, to warn them. That honesty mattered. The trust fund I'd set up for him remained mostly untouched even after he gained access. When I finally asked why, he shrugged. "I don't want to own me," he said. "I've had enough of that." I believe him. The scholarship fund grew beyond what I imagined. Former students wrote letters describing how tuition assistance changed their lives. Some became teachers, some engineers, some just stable adults who no longer lived one emergency away from collapse. Each letter felt like a quiet conversation with Lane, like she was still shaping the world through me. But not every moment was peaceful. There were nights I lay awake, replaying the confrontation, the glass in my hand, the moment I realized my own son was capable of harming me. Those memories never disappeared completely. They softened, but they remained. Scars don't vanish. They fade. One evening, years later, Lucas invited me to dinner at the restaurant after closing. Just the two of us. He poured wine and hesitated, then spoke. "I'm thinking about expanding," he said. "Another location." I studied his face. "Why?" "Because I'm ready," he said simply. "Not because I feel pressured. Not because I want more. Because I can do it without losing what matters." That answer told me everything. "I'll support you," I said, "as long as it stays honest." He smiled. "That's the only way I know how." We talked late into the night. About family, about mistakes, about the strange way loss sharpens gratitude. When I drove home, I realized something had shifted again. I no longer felt like a survivor. I felt like a steward of stories, of lessons, of responsibility. The lottery money continued to shrink, and I felt lighter with every deliberate choice. I helped fund addiction counseling programs, quietly, never attaching my name. I supported elder legal advocacy groups. I paid off the mortgages of 2 former colleagues who'd been struggling in retirement. I didn't do these things to feel good. I did them to feel aligned. One day, sorting through old papers, I found Elaine's handwriting tucked inside a book she'd loved. A note she'd written years before her diagnosis, almost casually. If something good ever happens to us, promise me you won't let it change who you are. I sat there for a long time holding that note. I think I kept that promise. When people asked me if winning the lottery was the best thing that ever happened to me, I answered honestly. No, I said, but it showed me what mattered. Money didn't bring happiness. It brought exposure. It stripped away excuses. It forced choices. And choices, made clearly, deliberately, shaped everything that followed. One Sunday afternoon, I watched Aaron play with his young daughter in my backyard. She laughed freely, unaware of the weight behind her family history. Watching him kneel in the grass, fully present, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Love, caution, gratitude, redemption. I'd learned wasn't dramatic. It was repetitive, daily, quiet. As the sun dipped low, Aaron looked up at me. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me," he replied, "even when you had every reason to." I considered that. "I didn't give up on you," I said. "I gave up on pretending." He nodded. He understood. That night, alone in my house, I reflected on how close I'd come to losing everything. Not just money, but identity, dignity, life. How listening instead of celebrating had saved me. How patience had been the sharpest tool I'd ever used. I was older now, slower, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Grounded. And for the first time since Elaine died, I felt like the future, whatever shape it took, was something I could face without fear. The older I became, the more I understood that time doesn't heal everything, but it does change the way wounds speak. What once screamed eventually whispers. What once consumed becomes something you carry without noticing the weight every moment. I wasn't the man I'd been before the ticket, before the overheard voices, before the night my son knelt on my living room floor. I wasn't broken either. I was reshaped. My health stayed steady, though I felt the years settle into my bones. Mornings came a little slower. Knees complained more loudly. Still, I woke each day grateful for quiet, grateful that my life no longer felt like something waiting to collapse. Lucas's second restaurant opened without fanfare. No speeches. No ribbon cutting. Just food, warmth, and people who felt welcome the moment they walked in. I watched them move through the space with calm confidence, correcting mistakes gently, praising effort quietly. Leadership, I'd learned, was never loud. Aaron continued rebuilding in small, deliberate steps. He didn't rush forgiveness. Didn't ask for trust. He earned consistency instead. Some weeks I heard from him often, other weeks not at all. That was fine. Relationships rebuilt slowly were the ones that lasted. One afternoon, he asked if he could bring his daughter to see me. "She asks about you," he said carefully. "I tell her you're her grandfather. She wants to know why we don't visit more." I thought about it longer than he expected. "Bring her," I said. But no stories yet, just time. When they arrived, she ran ahead of him, fearless and curious, clutching a stuffed animal nearly her size. She looked up at me, studied my face with serious eyes, then smiled. "You're tall," she said. I laughed, a real laugh. I used to be taller. She accepted that explanation immediately and went back to exploring. Watching Aaron follow her, attentive and gentle, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not absolution, not erasure, something quieter, possibility. Later, after she fell asleep on the couch, Aaron sat across from me, hands folded. "I know I don't get to ask for this," he said, "but thank you for letting her know you." I nodded. Children shouldn't inherit debts they didn't create. He swallowed hard. As the months passed, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not the next letter. Not the next court update. Not the next apology. I lived inside my days instead of bracing against them. I traveled a little. Nothing extravagant. Quiet places. Small towns. I sat in cafes where no one knew my name or my story. It felt freeing to be anonymous again, to be just another aging man reading a book by a window. The scholarship fund crossed a milestone one autumn. 50 students supported. I attended a small gathering where a few recipients spoke about what the assistance had meant. One young woman said something that stayed with me. "You didn't just pay tuition," she said. "You bought me time to breathe." Time. That word followed me home. Time had nearly been stolen from me. Quietly, efficiently, by someone who knew my habits, my trust, my vulnerabilities. Now I was giving away deliberately. Lucas joined me for a weekend visit not long after that. We sat on the porch late into the night. The air cool, the world still. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone upstairs?" he asked. "All the time," I said, "and I don't like the answer." He nodded. "Me neither." Silence stretched between us, comfortable. "I'm glad you listened," he said finally. "So am I." Another letter arrived from Aaron around that time. Not emotional, not apologetic, just an update about his work, his meetings, his family. At the end, a single sentence stood alone. "I'm learning how to live without hiding." I folded the letter and placed it with the others. Not trophies, records. As winter approached, my energy waned slightly. Doctors used words like normal and age-appropriate. I accepted them without resistance. I had no fear of decline. I had seen what mattered. I had put things in order. One evening, after dinner at Lucas's restaurant, I sat alone in my car longer than usual before driving home. Through the window, I watched staff laughing, cleaning, sharing stories. The place hummed with life. Elaine would have loved this, I thought. Not the success. The warmth. At home, I pulled out an old box of photographs I hadn't touched in years. There was Elaine at 25, laughing at something I had said. There was Aaron as a child, missing teeth, proud of a crooked science fair project. There was Lucas as a teenager, arms slung around my shoulders, smiling with the confidence of someone who trusted the future. I didn't feel regret looking at those pictures. I felt gratitude for having loved deeply, even when love later hurt, for having believed in people, even when belief was tested, for having listened when it mattered most. The past no longer frightened me. It informed me. One Sunday afternoon, Aaron stopped by unexpectedly. "No agenda, no announcement. I just wanted to check on you," he said. We drank coffee, talked about nothing important. As he stood to leave, he hesitated. "I know things will never be what they were," he said. "I don't expect that. I just want you to know, I'm here, however you need me, or if you don't." I studied him for a long moment. "That's the first honest offer you've made in a long time," I said. He nodded. "It's enough," I added. He left quietly. That night, I slept deeply without dreams. And when I woke the next morning, I realized something profound had shifted, not in my circumstances, but in me. I no longer measured my life by what I had survived. I measured it by what I had chosen to protect. The first real sign that my body was beginning to slow down came not as pain, but as hesitation. Simple movements took longer to initiate, as if my muscles wanted reassurance before obeying. I noticed it when I reached for a book and my hand hovered an extra second, when I stood from a chair and needed to pause before taking the first step. Aging, the doctor said. Ordinary. Predictable. I accepted that more easily than I'd accepted betrayal. Because aging was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. The quiet days grew quieter. I spent less time driving, more time walking familiar routes, letting repetition become comfort. The neighborhood changed subtly, new families, new dogs, new cars, but my routines anchored me. I liked knowing where I belonged. Lucas came by less often, not out of distance, but because his world was expanding. 2 restaurants now, staff meetings, suppliers, menus. I watched him from afar with the detached pride of someone who understands that success, if nurtured correctly, eventually requires space. When we did see each other, our conversations were unhurried. "You ever wish you kept more of it?" he asked once, meaning the money. I shook my head. I kept what I needed. He smiled. "That's a rare answer." Aaron's visits became more natural, less careful, still respectful, but no longer fragile. He helped around the house without being asked, fixed things, brought groceries. He talked about his work with a steadiness that suggested it wasn't just a job, but a form of penance he'd chosen willingly. One afternoon, as we sat in the backyard watching his daughter chase bubbles, he said something that surprised me. "I don't dream about money anymore," he said. "I dream about messing up again." "That's fear," I replied. "It can be useful if it keeps you honest." "I think it does," he said. "I don't ever want to be that man again." I believe him, not blindly, but based on evidence. My health wavered that winter. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind me that time was not something I controlled. I spent a few days in the hospital for observation after a minor episode of dizziness. Lying in that bed, surrounded by beeping machines, I was struck by how different this felt from the imagined future my son had once planned for me. I wasn't confused. I wasn't alone. And no one was whispering about how to end me quietly. Lucas visited. Aaron did too. They didn't hover. They didn't argue. They simply sat, present. That mattered more than anything. When I was discharged, I went home with new awareness. Not fear, but urgency. Not panic, but intention. I began writing letters. Not to be read immediately. Not to explain or justify, but to clarify. To leave behind something clean instead of confusion. I wrote one for Aaron, one for Lucas, one for my granddaughter. To be open when she was older, I wrote about mistakes I'd made, about love I'd failed to express clearly, about boundaries I wished I'd set sooner. I wrote about Elaine most of all, how she'd understood people better than I ever had, how she'd worried quietly, loved fiercely, and forgiven more easily than she should have. Writing those letters didn't feel morbid. It felt responsible. I also updated everything legal, not because I distrusted anyone, but because clarity is kindness when you're gone. No ambiguity, no assumptions, no opportunities for resentment to creep back in where it didn't belong. Aaron noticed. "You're preparing," he said one afternoon. "Yes." "Are you scared?" I thought about it. "No, I'm finished running." He nodded, eyes damp. Spring came again. The scholarship fund crossed another milestone. I stopped attending events. Lucas went in my place. He spoke quietly, never centering himself. Watching him from the back of the room one time, I realized something important. The best legacy doesn't announce itself. It continues when you step aside. That realization brought peace. A letter arrived from Aaron one evening, not handwritten this time, but typed careful. He wrote about a new program he was helping build for young men with gambling addictions, early intervention, education. Stories shared before damage became irreversible. At the end, he wrote, "I don't get to undo what I did to you, but if I can stop even one person from doing the same thing to someone they love, maybe something good can come from it." I folded the letter slowly. Something good already had. That summer, Lucas invited us all to a small gathering at the original restaurant. No celebration, just family, staff, people who'd been there from the beginning. My granddaughter climbed onto my lap with a confidence children reserve only for those they trust completely. "Tell me a story," she demanded. I smiled. "About what?" "About when you were little." I laughed. "That's not very exciting." She considered that. "Then tell me a true one." So I did. I told her a story about a man who almost lost everything because he didn't listen, and how listening, really listening, saved him. She nodded solemnly, as if absorbing a lesson she wouldn't understand fully for years. That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind for a while, sitting at a corner table, watching Lucas clean the bar himself even though he didn't have to. "You know," I said, "you don't have to do that anymore." He shrugged. I like knowing how things feel from the ground. That answer told me he'd be fine. As autumn returned, my energy thinned again. I slept more, walked less, but my mind remained clear. My heart felt settled. One evening, Aaron stayed late. I know you don't like big conversations, he said, but I need to say this. I waited. I know I broke something that can't be fully repaired, he continued. I don't expect it to be. I just want you to know that I'm grateful you didn't protect me from consequences. If you had, I don't think I'd be alive in the way I am now. I met his eyes. That was the hardest choice I've ever made. I know, he said. Thank you for making it. Silence followed, not awkward, not heavy, just full. That night, alone, I reflected on how strange the journey had been. A single ticket, a single overheard conversation, a single moment of restraint that changed everything. I had learned that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it wears familiarity. Sometimes it speaks in calm, reasonable tones. Sometimes it calls you dad. But I had also learned something else. That clarity, once earned, does not leave you. That integrity, once tested, becomes stronger. And that love, when paired with boundaries, can survive even the deepest fractures. I slept well that night. And when I woke, I knew, with a certainty deeper than fear, that whatever came next, I was ready. The realization that my body was slowing down didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, the way truth often does. It showed up in small hesitations, when my hand hovered a second too long before turning a page, when I needed to pause before standing, when my breath shortened after a walk that used to feel effortless. The doctors called it normal aging. I accepted that explanation easily. Aging, at least, was honest. It didn't pretend to love you while planning your downfall. The days grew quieter, not empty, just calmer. I found comfort in routine. Morning walks became shorter, but more deliberate. I learned the rhythm of my neighborhood. The way the same dog barked every afternoon, the way the mail arrived 2 minutes later each season, the way the sunlight shifted across my living room wall as the year moved forward. There was peace and predictability. Lucas's life expanded rapidly. The second restaurant demanded more of him, not just time but judgment. Staffing issues, supply problems, unexpected inspections. I watched him navigate it all without panic. He didn't rush decisions. He didn't chase shortcuts. He treated people the way he expected to be treated. That consistency mattered. It always does. When he visited, our conversations were slower, more thoughtful. People think success is about speed, he said once. But most mistakes happen when people rush. I smiled. You learn that from watching what not to do. He laughed. Probably. Aaron's presence in my life changed gradually. At first, he had visited like a guest, careful, restrained, always ready to leave if he sensed discomfort. Over time, he began to move like family again, not entitled. Earned. He fixed things around the house without asking. He brought groceries. He stayed longer without filling the space with apologies or explanations. One afternoon, we sat in the backyard while his daughter played nearby, chasing bubbles Lucas had blown for her earlier. I don't dream about money anymore, Aaron said suddenly. I dream about failing again. That fear can keep you honest, I said. I think it does, he replied. I never want to be that man again. I didn't respond immediately. I watched his daughter laugh, free of the weight her father once carried. I believe you, I said finally, and I meant it. Not because I wanted to, but because his actions had earned it. That winter, my health wavered just enough to remind me I wasn't immune to time. A brief hospital stay after a dizzy spell brought back memories I hadn't invited. The beeping machines, the sterile air, the vulnerability of lying still while strangers watched numbers rise and fall. But this time was different. I wasn't confused. I wasn't isolated. And no one whispered about what should happen to me next. Lucas came. Aaron came. They sat without hovering, without forcing conversation. They respected my silence. That mattered. When I returned home, something shifted inside me. Not fear. Urgency. The quiet kind. I began writing letters. Not dramatic ones. Honest ones. One to Aaron. one to Lucas, one to my granddaughter, to be opened years from now. I wrote about mistakes I'd made, about generosity I confused with guidance, about boundaries I wished I'd drawn earlier. I wrote about Elaine more than anything else. Her insight, her compassion, the way she saw problems long before they reached the surface. Writing didn't feel like preparing to leave. It felt like cleaning up after a long storm. I also updated everything legal, not because I fear betrayal, but because clarity prevents conflict. No assumptions, no gray areas, no room for misunderstanding. Peace is often built on paperwork. Aaron noticed. "You're preparing," he said gently. "Yes." "Does that scare you?" "No," I replied. "It comforts me." Spring returned. The scholarship fund crossed another milestone. I no longer attended ceremonies. Lucas represented us quietly, respectfully. Watching him from the back of a small auditorium one time, I realized something important. The best legacies continue even when you step out of the room. That realization brought a peace deeper than pride. A letter arrived from Aaron that summer. Typed, measured. He wrote about a new initiative he was helping build. Education programs for young men vulnerable to gambling addiction. Early intervention. Stories told before shame hardened into habit. At the end, he wrote, "I can't undo what I did to you. But if I can stop even one person from doing the same thing, maybe something good can come from it." I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. Something good already had. That summer, Lucas invited us all to a quiet gathering at the original restaurant. No celebration, just family, staff, and people who had been there from the beginning. My granddaughter climbed onto my lap with the confidence only children have. "Tell me a story," she said. "What kind?" I asked. "A true one." So I told her about a man who almost lost everything because he didn't listen, and how listening saved him. She nodded seriously, absorbing a lesson she wouldn't fully understand for years. After everyone left, I stayed behind, watching Lucas clean the bar himself even though he didn't need to. "You don't have to do that anymore," I said. "I like remembering where I started," he replied. That told me he'd be fine. As autumn returned, my energy thinned again. I slept more, walked less, but my mind stayed sharp. My heart felt settled. One evening, Aaron stayed late. "I know things will never be what they were," he said. "I don't expect that. I just want you to know I'm grateful you didn't protect me from consequences. If you had, I don't think I'd still be here in the way that matters." That was the hardest choice I ever made. I said, "I know," he replied. "Thank you for making it." Silence followed. Full, not awkward. That night, alone, I reflected on how fragile everything had been. One ticket, one overheard conversation, one moment restraint that changed the direction of every life involved. I had learned that danger doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it speaks calmly. Sometimes it calls you dad. But I had also learned this. Clarity once earned stays. Integrity once tested strengthens. And love, when paired with boundaries, can survive even betrayal. I slept deeply that night, and when I woke, I felt ready, whatever came next. The truth about time is that it doesn't announce itself when it begins to run short. It simply keeps going, indifferent to whether you're ready or not. I noticed it most clearly in the mornings, when the light came to the curtains, and I needed a moment longer before rising, not from pain, but from reflection. I had lived a long life already. Longer than I ever expected, longer than Elaine had been given. That realization no longer frightened me. It focused me. My days became simpler, almost intentionally so. I stopped trying to fill time and started letting it fill me. I read slower. I ate slower. I listened more than I spoke. When people talked, I watched how they talked, what they avoided, what they returned to. Patterns tell more truth than words ever do. Lucas visited less frequently but more meaningfully. When he came, he stayed present. Phones away. No rushing. He brought stories from the restaurants, not just successes, but problems. Staff conflicts. Financial pressure. Moments where shortcuts tempted him. "I think about what you went through," he said once, staring at the yard. about how easy it is to justify bad choices when money's involved. That's because money amplifies what's already there. I replied, it doesn't create character. It reveals it. He nodded, absorbing that. Aaron's visits grew more relaxed. Not careless, respectful. He no longer looked like a man waiting for judgment. He looked like a man living with awareness. That difference mattered. He spoke openly about his work, about the people he helped, about how often he saw his old self in them. I don't tell them my story for sympathy, he said one afternoon. I tell it so they don't think they're smarter than consequences. That humility was new and earned. My granddaughter became a regular presence. She brought noise and movement into a house that had learned silence too well. She asked questions that made me laugh and think at the same time. Why do grown-ups argue about money? She asked once. Because they forget what it's for, I answered. What is it for? Making life easier, I said, not bigger. She accepted that easily. Children usually do. As the year turned, I began giving away things, not money, but objects. Books I loved, tools I no longer used. Items Elaine had kept that deserved a life beyond a drawer. Letting go didn't feel like loss. It felt like circulation, like things continuing their purpose elsewhere. One evening, while sorting through old papers, I found a letter Elaine had written during her illness but never sent. It was addressed to me. I had no memory of seeing it before. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. She wrote about fear, not of dying, but of what would happen after. About how people change when pressure arrives. About how she trusted me, but worried I trusted others too easily. She told me she believed in kindness, but not at the cost of clarity. Love doesn't mean blindness, she wrote. It means choosing to see. I sat with that letter for a long time. She had been right. Again, my health declined gradually, predictably. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet accumulation of fatigue. My doctor spoke gently about planning ahead. I appreciated that. There was dignity in preparation. I spoke to Lucas and Aaron separately. No speeches, just honesty. I'm not going anywhere tomorrow, I told them. But I don't want surprises later. They understood. One night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone and thought about the man I'd been before the lottery ticket. Content, trusting, slightly naive. I didn't judge that man harshly anymore. He had lived according to the information he had at the time. What mattered was the man I became after. I had listened. I had acted. I had refused to disappear quietly. That mattered. Spring returned again. I found myself sleeping more during the day, staying awake later at night, listening to the house settle. Silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. One evening, Aaron stayed after dinner. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. If I ever start slipping, he continued carefully, if you ever see me justifying something that shouldn't be justified, will you tell me? I looked at him steadily. Immediately. Even if it hurts? Especially then. He nodded. That's what I hoped you'd say. That trust, real trust, not assumed, was new and fragile, but real. Lucas came by the following weekend with news. I'm stepping back a bit, he said. Not from the business, just from expansion. I want to make sure what I've built stays solid. That's wisdom, I said, not hesitation. He smiled. I learned it somewhere. My granddaughter fell asleep on my shoulder that night, her breath slow and even. I watched her chest rise and fall, and felt something deep and quiet inside me. Continuity. Life moving forward, not erasing what came before, but carrying it. The lottery money, what little remained, no longer felt like part of my identity. It was simply something that had passed through my hands, leaving traces behind. The real wealth was sitting in that room, in trust repaired carefully, in lessons learned at great cost, in love that survived truth. One morning, I woke before dawn and knew, without fear, without drama, that I was approaching the final season of my life. Not the end, just the narrowing. I wasn't sad. I had said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done, protected what mattered most. Whatever came next, I was ready. The final season of my life did not arrive with thunder or warnings. It came quietly, the way dusk settles over a familiar street. Nothing dramatic changed overnight. I still woke to the same light through the window, still drank my coffee slowly, still listened to the small sound of the house, as if they were part of a language only I understood. But beneath all of it was a steady knowing. I was no longer preparing for what might happen. I was completing what already had. I stopped fighting fatigue and began listening to it. When my body asked for rest, I gave it rest. When my mind wanted silence, I let the silence stay. I learned that peace isn't something you chase. It's something you allow when you've stopped running from truth. Aaron came by often, sometimes with my granddaughter, sometimes alone. He no longer carried guilt on his face the way he once had. It was still there, of course, but it no longer ruled him. He spoke carefully now, not because he was afraid of saying the wrong thing, but because he understood the weight words could carry. One afternoon, as we sat together watching the sky shift colors, he said something I hadn't expected. "I finally understand what scared me most that night," he said quietly. When I asked, "When I realized you weren't weak," he said. "You were just patient. And patience terrifies people who are running from themselves." I nodded. "It usually does." He looked at me, eyes clear. "I'm not running anymore." That mattered more than any apology. Lucas visited the next day. He brought no news, no problems to solve. Just presence. We sat together in the backyard, neither of us speaking for a long while. "You did more than protect your money," he said eventually. "You protected the shape of your life." I smiled faintly. I didn't know that was what I was doing at the time. "That's how the right choices usually feel," he replied. Unclear in the moment, obvious later. As summer faded into fall, my strength diminished further. Walking became slower. Climbing stairs more difficult. I accepted help without resistance. Pride had served me once. It no longer had a job. I spent long hours remembering, not reliving, just remembering. Elaine's laugh, the way she used to correct me gently when I was wrong. Her quiet warnings about trusting too easily, given not in accusation but in care. I realized she had been preparing me long before I ever knew I would need it. One evening, as I sat alone, I opened the box of letters I'd written months earlier. I reread them slowly. Nothing needed changing. That felt right. The last letter I read was the one from my granddaughter. I imagine her opening it years from now, learning not about money or scandal, but about listening, about boundaries, about how love and strength are not opposites. That night, I slept deeply. The days that followed blurred softly. Meals became lighter. Conversations shorter, but more meaningful. I spoke less and listened more. I found that people say their truest things when they sense time matters. Aaron stayed the night once, sleeping on the couch like he used to when he was younger. In the morning, he stood in the doorway of my room. "I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm saying goodbye," he said. "Then don't," I replied. "Just be here." He nodded, tears forming, but he stayed steady. Lucas arrived later that afternoon. The three of us sat together, not as a broken family patched together by circumstance, but as people who had chosen honesty over illusion. That choice had cost us dearly, but it also saved us. As evening fell, my granddaughter climbed onto my lap, curled against me, warm and trusting. "Tell me a story," she whispered. I smiled. "All right." I told her a simple one, about a man who almost lost everything because he didn't listen, and how one quiet moment of attention changed the direction of his life. She fell asleep before I finished. That night, after the house had gone still, I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds one last time. The ticking clock, the settling walls, the distant hum of the world continuing without me. I wasn't afraid. I had faced betrayal without becoming bitter. I had held my ground without hardening my heart. I had loved my son enough to let him fall, and lived long enough to watch him stand again. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that strength is not loud and survival is not victory. Survival is simply refusing to disappear when others expect you to. When morning came, I didn't wake, but I left behind clarity instead of chaos, truth instead of silence. and a family that understood, finally, that love without boundaries is not kindness. It is surrender. If my story stayed with you, take a moment to support it. Subscribe to the channel, share where you're watching from the comments, and tell me, what would you have done in my place? Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most.